Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, and today I want to share a little psychological commentary on a recent case that has come to light, and that is the case of Caleb Flynn, a former American Idol contestant who was charged on Friday, February 20th, with the murder of his wife. So, first, I'll just share a little bit about what happened. So, on February 16th, Monday, in those early morning hours, Caleb Flynn called 911 and he reported that his wife had been shot. This was Monday, the early morning hours. While this happened, the two daughters were at home and they were sleeping, and they reportedly did not hear what happened and slept through it. The family also reportedly had two dogs, I believe two golden doodles. So, fast forward a few days later, and Caleb Flynn was charged with the murder. He was also charged with 2 counts of felonious assault and tampering with evidence. The court documents show that prosecutors believed that the scene had been staged to look like a burglary or a home invasion originally. And then on Friday 20th, he was arraigned, and Caleb Flynn pleaded not guilty. Now, this case will be adjudicated, and the court will determine whether Caleb Flynn was guilty or innocent of those charges. I want to take a moment and talk about cases in which the man is found guilty of murdering his wife and what those motivations can be. Now, specifically, I want to address a couple of questions that people often ask when a man murders his wife. And the first question is this one: why would the man think that he could get away with it? Most people just can't mentally wrap their heads around that. Now, in cases where the man does not plan out the murder of his wife, a lot of times it is pure emotion and often rage that causes the man to do that. So he doesn't, in those moments, necessarily believe that he can get away with it. He doesn't necessarily believe that he will. There are other cases, however, where the murder is planned. And so, why would such a man believe that he could get away with the murder? So, psychologically, this often speaks to a grandiosity. The belief, the man could have the belief that he is special enough or smart enough, savvy enough, and strategic enough to be able to game the system, to be smarter than investigators, to be smarter than law enforcement, and figure out things that other people were not special or smart enough to figure out that got them caught. So a lot of times there is this grandiosity, this grandiose thinking that underlies that poor decision making. Now, another question that people often ask that I want to address is this one: why would a man not just divorce his wife rather than murder her? Why murder her and not just divorce? So, first of all, I just want to point out that this question is a reflection on very rational thinking. Rational thinking. But this thinking that asks this question is also what's called clinically pro-social thinking. So you've heard of the term antisocial thinking, antisocial behavior. What is that? That is a disregard, a deep disregard for social norms, social rules, and the rights of others. So the opposite of that is pro-social thinking. So anybody who would ask themselves, why would somebody not just divorce, which would be the pro-social choice to make, the rational choice, as opposed to murder, which would be the antisocial choice. So why would a man murder as opposed to just divorcing? Well, sometimes, and I know a lot of you watching will know this already, because a lot of times when many of these cases get adjudicated, a lot of times there ends up being a mercenary motivation. And so that is almost understood largely in the culture, one of the most primary motives for murder. Now, in the case of mercenary motivations, sometimes there's life insurance involved. But another thing is that divorce is truly expensive. So a man could be engaging in the really poor thinking to think that setting up two households and alimony or child support payments are really so expensive and can go on for many, many, many years And they may say to themselves that they refuse to accept that reality. And so they tell themselves that they want to murder as an option. Another reason that sometimes men engage in murder is to avoid deep humiliation that they perceive could happen if they were to divorce. For example, if a man is left, some men may feel like that experience may be so shameful or so humiliating that they will not allow that reality to take place. So some men tell themselves in this situation, they will prevent, they will control that humiliation from taking place by engaging in murder. Another reason has to do with a man's social community. If a man perceives that he is a part of a social community that would look down on him or think less of him, judge him, even be angry at him for engaging in something like divorce, he may perceive that as a very negative response. As opposed to, he may tell himself that if he were to lose a wife, by murder, someone else murdering her, he could make the mistake of telling himself that he could induce the sympathy of others in his social community if he were to lose a wife at the hands of murder by someone else. And in some circumstances, a man who murders his wife may have already identified another female that he wants to start a relationship with, or he may actively already have started that relationship. And so he falsely makes the mistake of thinking to himself that this is the cleanest, easiest way to start that new life is by committing murder. But what this really reflects is wishful, magical thinking. And finally, what you may be thinking is, where is the empathy, especially when there are children involved? Because who isn't thinking, how could this affect these children? How could this affect their lives for years to come? The empathy simply is not a primary thought in this behavior. And that, of course, is a major problem because that is one of the fundamental characteristics that should preside in any family system. Parents prioritizing the emotional needs and protection of their children. All right. And before I close today, I just want to make a final point about the 911 call. People may listen to a 911 call. In the case of Caleb Flynn, they could listen to that call or any number of calls in high profile cases where people listen to the 911 call and listen to the tone of voice or what is said in the call. It is very natural for people to try to listen to things like that, try to gain the information, and then make a determination about what they believe. Does this sit right with their instincts? Does this sound true or does this sound false or staged? One of the things that's really important to remember when it comes to acute stress events or traumatic events is that there is no universal way that people react to those stress. So it's important to not assume too much based on how one responds emotionally in a situation like that. One of the things that comes to mind is the trial of Amanda Knox, specifically the period when Amanda Knox, who in 2007 was being investigated in Perugia, Italy, for the possible murder of Meredith Kercher. Well, law enforcement was looking at her and questioning whether she had involvement. And one day, while Amanda Knox was in the police station in Perugia, she was filmed on video doing a cartwheel. A lot of people looked at that cartwheel, that video, and it was so emotionally salient to see that. And a lot of times it's easy in that situation to assume that, for example, might indicate guilt. Why would somebody in such a stressful situation be engaging in what looks to be such lighthearted behavior? But it's important, again, to remember that we can't make assumptions based on reactions like that alone, especially when it comes to acute stress events. All right? I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist.